In the last episode, I talked about hindsight bias. It is a psychological bias on how people's judgment can be affected and how they may be thinking differently as if they had already think about this before. So this episode, I'll be talking about a very similar bias, and it's called confirmation bias. Actually, some people think that hindsight bias is a type of confirmation bias, and I'll be exploring the bigger category of confirmation bias. So basically, confirmation bias is where people's belief is they made a belief and they trust it, which is very normal in itself, with nothing to be wrong. But then here's the bias, is that people tend to try to go and find beliefs or find evidence, or maybe they believe more in evidence that support their current belief. So normally, if you think about it, if you're gonna make if you make an opinion, you maybe want to try and find evidence that support it, yes, but you want to also find evidence that denies your opinion. Because if you find one evidence that makes your opinion or hypothesis false, then obviously it is already proven false. You don't need to go ahead and find evidence that to prove it's true. So, and this confirmation bias, where people just tend to go find evidence to prove that what they think is true instead of false. So personally, I'm a chess player, and I believe a very cool advice I got from one of the YouTube videos I watched was how you should think as a chess player. So as a chess player, you often make plans in a game to find maybe ways of capturing your opponent's pieces or maybe checkmating your opponent, and you want to develop these plans to launch attacks to win the game. So making a plan is very important in the game of chess, and making the correct plan is the more important part. So how can you differentiate between a correct plan and an incorrect plan? Players can't just rely on pattern recognition, because not every position may be the same. If one piece changes, the whole position may change, and maybe pattern recognition is not the best option here. So it requires players to do calculations and evaluate their positions, and to evaluate how their plan is gonna work. So a very crucial mistake that a lot of chess players make is they start to evaluate their plans and position by thinking of how their plans will work. So maybe you see this move will maybe force an opponent to move back, or maybe force the opponent king to move, and maybe it will capture the opponent's piece if he doesn't move it. But that's not what the opponent's gonna do. He's not just gonna not move the piece for you to capture it. If he's gonna do that, then you don't need to do the plan at all. So basically, you have to think about what can go wrong with your plan. So maybe you see that the opponent has a piece there. Maybe he can block the check instead of just moving his king into a checkmate. Maybe he can counterattack you and capture your pieces instead. Maybe your opponent has some kind of plans already in his or her mind, and maybe if you just keep focusing on your own plan and see it, maybe you will miss it, and this is called tunnel vision. But we're not talking about tunnel vision today. So it is very important to talk about how you need to think and evaluate your plans, and thinking about how it may go wrong and how it may actually be better if you think about how it will go wrong instead of how your plan will actually work. So there have been experiments to test about this confirmation bias for a long time, and a lot of studies found that even simple question and phrasing questions can have great impact on how people think because of confirmation bias. For example, I ask you, are you happy or are you unhappy? So if you're asked, are you happy? I'm implying you to think that you are happy. And if I'm saying, are you unhappy with your life? And maybe I'm saying that you are unhappy in the first place. That's why I asked you the negative side of it. And studies have found that if you ask the positive or the negative side, maybe your answer would more likely to go with the positive or negative side. And it is because of how you believed in this sort of question phrasing that affected your judgment, which is a very big thing you want to look into about. And a lot of people, if face more complex questions, not just simply happy or unhappy, it would be like, for example, if you're an introvert, maybe you ask questions about what do you find unpleasant about like very big or noisy parties. If you're an extrovert, maybe you'll be asked what will you do to make a very boring party more interesting. Maybe these are some connotations beneath these sentences that, for example, if you ask the introvert question, it may imply that you're an introvert, and a lot of people just miss these facts that they just can't falsify their question, and the one who asked the question will automatically have perhaps confirmation bias. You think that you're an introvert or an extrovert. So it's very important to recognize in situations that people may have confirmation bias as well. Not only you who may have confirmation bias. Look out for people who have confirmation bias. And there is also different types of confirmation bias. For example, I believe every one of us use search engines or just search online for information. And for example, you're doing a project and you want to search information to support your project, and you want some facts. So a very big negative point of search engines is that they show you all the websites. They don't actually think about them. They just show all the popular websites, and you actually, a lot of people don't actually fact check the information and takes what is shown for recommended at the first page. So this is a very, very bad habit, and you may be subjected to confirmation bias by searching evidence that support your confirmation bias. There's one type of confirmation bias is for searching for evidence to support your confirmation bias. Well, this can be easily avoided if you search for evidence that doesn't support your hypothesis. Maybe, for example, an opposite search. Maybe you want to search for facts that maybe does not support your ideas, and search for facts that disapproves your ideas and make your ideas false. And then another type of confirmation bias is you have a higher chance of believing that you believe more evidence that support your ideas more than evidence that disapproves your idea. And this may be because of how maybe you don't like to be proven wrong, or maybe you're given a lot of information as in daily life, and a way that your brain handles all of these information and to choose which information to treat as important and which one to ignore is really, and a very simple way to do that, of course, is confirmation bias, and to see what actually supports your ideas, and maybe you pay more attention to them. So it actually reduces your brain's workload in some sense when you directly to have these kind of if you think about them and you look for them, it will reduce the information you need to search for. And also why do you think that these confirmation bias exist, and who do they exist from? So, very most commonly, confirmation bias exists on people. It's not basically people who are like smarter have less confirmation bias. No, it's based on how rationally do you think. So basically, if you think more rationally, you have a less chance of having confirmation bias, which is actually makes a lot of sense. And if you think more irrationally, you have more confirmation bias chance. So, what are effects of confirmation bias? So, here's more effects on confirmation bias. For example, our our daily life, like using social media, you tend to, and this social media can because of confirmation bias, can spread more fake news, for example, more fast and misleading information, and it can be spread on even stuff like credible news, like or reliable sources, and then confirmation bias can help spread of these all fake news because of people just believe them and do not look at evidence that doesn't approve them. Or for example, in politics, maybe they support a party and they don't change in the party and they don't believe in the other party. Or in the stock market, where you believe a stock goes so well, and you believe, for example, a fund is doing very well. You look at all the evidence, maybe it has grown like 100% for the past year, and you just invest into this fund or stock. But you don't look at ideas that think that this stock maybe will going down in the future. And this is very important because maybe you lose a lot of money from this. So these are some common effects of confirmation bias, and you should be watching out if confirmation is happening to you or maybe your friends or family. Maybe you can remind them of confirmation bias existing in their lives. So make sure that you don't fall for this confirmation bias.